I betrayed my husband with his boss for luxury, but he found out in the worst way. I don't usually do things like this. In fact, I've never done anything like this. My presence on the internet up until a few weeks ago when everything happened was minimal at best. But I've decided to tell my side of the story since no one else around me cares enough to listen. I'm not asking for pity or handouts or anything. I know that what I did was messed up and that I'm the villain of the situation, but I am asking that those of you who take the time to read this try and understand why I did what I did. I was just trying to make things better for myself. That's going to seem like an excuse for my behavior by the end of this, but it's the truth. I'm not some money-hungry, vindictive bitch who wanted to ruin her family or her career. I just wanted a little bit of a break. That's it. That was all I wanted. You might not believe me, but at least read the story first before you say anything nasty. I'm just doing this to get things off of my chest, to explain what happened from my point of view. And to do that, I kind of have to start at the beginning. My name is Joanne, female 30, and I met Peter, male 32, when I was a lot younger, probably 24 or 25, when I was still pretty naive about my beliefs on love and what a relationship was supposed to look like. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. Most times we had no money at all. My parents were middle-class workers who tried their best to give me and my siblings a decent life. It's just unfortunate that their best still had me and my siblings picking up odd jobs here and there in our teens. There were even times where we got called to the principal's office to get questioned about our late fees. It was embarrassing and I hated it, but I understood that there wasn't much that they could do. I didn't hate my parents or anything. I knew that they were trying their hardest, but it didn't help to ease the little bit of resentment that I had toward them, toward our tiny house, and toward the way we had to struggle all the time. Constantly having to fight to make ends meet didn't exactly make for a happy home, and it felt like the house was almost always full of tension. Everyone had to walk around eggshells around everyone because one wrong move or one wrong thing, and suddenly we were all yelling at each other. It was awful living like that, and I was grateful that I was able to get far away from it after school. My parents worked multiple jobs my final year of high school and were able to save a good bit of money. That plus what I'd been able to make from working after school was enough to send me to college. It doesn't sound the best, but I was happy to leave them behind, to move to a new town and start what felt like a new life. Away from the moodiness of that house and the anger that the unpaid bills sitting on the dining table seemed to stir in everyone. Almost immediately after college, I landed a job as an English teacher at a middle school in town. It didn't pay all that well, but it was stable work. It had good hours, and as much I hate to admit it, given how much they could be little assholes, I loved teaching those kids. I probably should have tried to branch out, get better paying work, but after just a few years of working there, I got comfortable. I put down roots by moving into an apartment and buying a cheap car. The apartment took a while to furnish, and it was mostly full of secondhand things, but I didn't care. It felt freeing to finally be away from what my life used to be. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I was suddenly living this grand life. I still struggled here and there, but it was so much better than it was back home. And it wasn't like I just completely forgot about my family. I still spoke to them on occasion and sent money back when I could, but it was nice and it was different to be on my own and to be away from them. I started to make friends at my job and getting to know more people, and that was when I met Peter. I'd never really dated before in high school. My parents had been pretty strict and insisted that my siblings and I focus on our studies instead of romance. Any one of us that was caught having anything to do with someone of the opposite sex was grounded, which seemed like the worst punishment in the world to me considering how much I hated being in that house, so I made sure to stay away from boys. Dating was something that happened slowly and rarely while I was in college. It never seemed to last or really go anywhere, but that didn't really matter to me back then. College was where I discovered that I was a bit of a hopeless romantic, which almost makes me laugh now given all that has happened, but like I said, I was naive. Peter was an accountant and the younger brother of the principal of the school I worked at. He did the accounting for the school's expenses as a favor to his brother, which meant that he was at the school a few times a week. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. I'd seen him around a lot, but I knew that he didn't teach or coach, so I was curious about him, about what brought him to the school every now and then. Because he was at the school so much, he was friendly with all the other teachers and a few of the students. I was the only one who didn't really know him or who he was. We finally got a chance to talk one day when I stumbled into him in the teacher's lounge. That was when we introduced ourselves, and I got to know that he was the principal's brother. Maybe it was his charm and good looks, or my over-eagerness to believe in some fairy tale romance, but things between us just clicked into place. I was surprised and a little embarrassed when the bell rung, and I'd found that I'd spent my entire break talking to him. After that, we just continued talking. Outside my work this time, thankfully. We went on dates and coffee runs. He worked at the accounting firm not too far away from the school, so it was perfect for us. Our time together was never anything fancy. We mostly stuck to cheap restaurants and local diners, because the two of us weren't exactly raking in a lot of money. I shouldn't have stayed with him. I should have listened to the voice in my head that was telling me that nothing good could come from us being together. I swear I'm not a materialistic person, or even a judgmental one, but after growing up the way I did, it was hard for me to look past the fact that Peter was struggling too. I did, though, despite my better judgment. I was in love, and like a fool, I thought that that was all we needed to make things work, to make our marriage work. But I was a hopeless romantic in love for the first time, and I'll say it one last time, I was a bit naive. Things with Peter moved fast, and a year into our relationship, he proposed. We didn't have the money to do anything extravagant for the wedding. We signed the papers at the courthouse and had a little get-together with our friends to celebrate back at our shared apartment. The first year was good. It was great, honestly. We quickly fell into a routine that worked for us while still maintaining the romance between us. We practically did the same thing every day, but it never felt tedious or boring. I had on rose-colored glasses, and I was intent on seeing the world through them. But unsurprisingly, and as most of you can already guess, my vision did turn gray after a while. The cracks started to show after we had our daughter. We'd never really spoken about children. We both knew we could barely support ourselves, much less a third person, but when he suggested it to me one night after we'd had sex, I didn't shut it down. I should have. What comes next is going to make it seem like I didn't love my husband, but I did. I loved him more than anything. Why else would I agree to get pregnant when I knew how much of a bad idea it was? Things changed completely after she was born, when she was out in the world with us, and not just a concept we could gush over. It was like that familiar gloom from my childhood home had settled over our apartment. We were both exhausted, but there was no way that we could rest, not when crying woke us up at odd hours of the night, and certainly not now that we had another mouth to feed. I couldn't even take that long off of work because we needed the money. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't even happen over a few weeks. But I slowly started to resent my husband too, and maybe myself as well. I'd left one terrible life and landed myself in an identical one. And just like before, I was angry all the time and nothing seemed to make me feel better. At least before we went on dates here and there, we tried to keep the romance, but all of that stopped. All our money went to rent, food, and our daughter. At least when I was living alone, I could take myself shopping here and there, spoil myself just a little when I had some extra cash, but now it felt like I'd been living in the same shirt and yoga pants for months. Those repetitive days that once felt easy started to irritate me. I felt like a zombie, trapped in an unrewarding loop. I was restless, I was bored, and I was sick of the life that I was being forced to live. I couldn't shake the feeling that I deserved better, that this wasn't the life that was meant for me. I sound terrible, but at least I'm not lying. It was hell, and every day felt awful. I was angry and I had nowhere else to put it, so I let it all out on Peter. I became snarky and rude, and I never felt bad because it felt like he deserved every bit of it for putting me in that situation, for not helping to make things better. A part of me still feels that way. I was stewing in regret and boredom for the better part of a year before it happened. The thing that ruined it all. It sounds ridiculous, but the thing that ruined my life was a Christmas party. Peter had tried to make me feel better by inviting me to his firm's Christmas party. He'd even bought me a new dress to wear to it. I could tell from just the sight of the fabric that it was very cheap, and so I insisted on wearing something else. I knew that it hurt his feelings, but I didn't care. It was tacky and a very ugly shade of green. I thought that it was bad enough that I could barely afford to get a proper haircut. Why should I suffer more by wearing something like that? I tried my best to be social, but it was hard to keep the frown off my face when I kept seeing all Peter's coworkers in expensive-looking suits. I couldn't help but wonder what was wrong with him and why he still hadn't been promoted after all these years. I'd always thought he was good at his job, but apparently I was wrong. The frown was only wiped off my face when Peter finally introduced me to his boss, Harry White. He was like the complete opposite of Peter. Taller, infinitely more charming, more handsome, and very rich. He pulled me in for a side hug, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It's not like I was looking to cheat on my husband or I was trying to go out of my way to punish him. I was merely infatuated with Harry and all that he seemed to represent. Wealth, status, a better life. I wasn't going to act on it. We'd only been able to speak for a few minutes before Peter had to pull us away again to go suck up to someone else. I'm honestly surprised that Peter didn't catch on to the way I kept staring at Harry from across the room, but I suppose I should be lucky he was so busy trying to impress people who barely paid attention to a word he was saying. I thought my conversation with Harry was it, and that I'd never hear from him again, except maybe if Peter decided to punish me again by inviting me to another one of his work parties. But it wasn't. The week I went back to work after New Year's, something was delivered to the school for me. I was confused, and for a second I allowed myself to hope that it was from my husband, but one look at the expensive packaging and I knew it could never have been him. It was from Harry, and it was the most beautiful necklace I'd ever seen in my life. The note that came attached to it mentioned something about how sad it was that my neck was bare at the party. I spent my entire lunch break staring at it, at the gems embedded in it. I went home that day and hid it deep in my side of the closet so Peter wouldn't find it. I was still considering selling it and using the money to buy a few things for the apartment when another gift was delivered. This time it was a watch, something sleek and silver and obviously expensive. At that point, I felt like maybe I needed to do something. Like I should tell Peter what was going on or maybe just return the gifts, but I couldn't bring myself to do either. So I put the watch right beside the necklace and pretended like they weren't there. I would only ever allow myself to stare at them in awe when Peter was sleeping, and I'd put my daughter to bed. After a pair of designer earrings came next, I knew I had to do something. And that something was going to Peter's firm. I pretended like I didn't know that Peter had some business to do for the firm out of town that day, even though Peter had droned on and on about it during dinner the previous night and used it as an excuse to get into the firm and see Harry. I tried to explain to him that he needed to stop and that Peter would be unhappy if he found out, but Harry surprised me by being shameless and asking if I'd like to have dinner with him. My immediate thought was to tell him no, that I couldn't betray Peter like that, but then Harry started going on about how I deserved to have nice things and be spoiled, and how I should let him be the one to take care of me since Peter wasn't able to. I should have walked outright, called Peter on my way out and told him everything, or maybe marched right to the company's HR office and tell them what had happened, but I didn't do any of that. Instead, I made the worst mistake ever and said yes. Leaving the apartment had been so easy that I almost felt guilty. Peter was too trusting and didn't even ask where I was going when he saw me dressed up. I know he just assumed I was going out with one of my friends and I didn't correct him. I met Harry in front of this expensive restaurant and proceeded to have the best meal of my life. It was the most delicious thing I'd ever eaten, and by the end of the dinner, he'd presented me with another gift. A bracelet this time, and it felt like I was in heaven. It felt like I was finally going to get the life I'd always wanted. I knew what Harry wanted from me, and I knew that if I went home with him, I would be betraying Peter. But I was blinded by all the gifts and the potential for a different life. This was all I'd ever wanted, and it was what I'd let love stop me from getting. I mean, maybe if I'd broken up with Peter when I should have, I'd have met Harry. Maybe being with Peter all this time was holding me back from getting what I wanted. This was what I thought as Harry led me outside and held the passenger side door open for me, and it was those thoughts that made me get in the car. All I could think about on the drive to his place was what I could be gifted next. I imagined designer bags, dresses, and shoes, and then I started to imagine trips and expensive flights. I slept with Harry that night and many nights after that. The gifts got better and more expensive like I wanted, and I got better at hiding them. Some of the money that I got from Harry went towards the rent and things my daughter needed. Peter didn't seem to notice that I had gotten a new haircut or a new phone, that my nails were done and my skin was glowing thanks to spa days paid for by Harry. Peter didn't seem to notice much at that time. He seemed preoccupied with something I didn't care enough to ask about. The things that I helped with around the apartment made me feel better about myself. It wasn't like I was just cheating because I wanted to. I was just trying to survive, to give myself better. I deserved a little bit of change in my life. I was finally being pampered, and it felt nice after years of struggling. I started to spend even more time with Harry. We even went on a 3-day trip out of the country once. I'd told Peter that I was going to see my family, and he didn't question it. It started to feel like I was living a double life. One with my daughter and husband that was shabby but still loved, and a luxurious one with Harry. I was greedy. I wanted them both, and I tried my hardest to keep them, but I should have known that it would all come crashing down on me, that I couldn't keep both for long. The truth of what Peter had been up to came to light on a night like any other. I'd gone to dinner with Harry, and after he'd taken me to this exclusive club where we'd gotten drunk. We'd started spending nights at expensive hotels at that time because he'd wanted to impress me, and so we went to one after the bar. We were right in the middle of having sex when Peter burst in. We'd been foolish and handsy and had forgotten to lock the door. I couldn't believe my eyes, and for a moment, I had hoped that I was just imagining things, but I wasn't. He was there, and he looked absolutely horrified. I wrapped the sheet around myself as fast as I could and tried to chase after him, but I was too slow and too drunk. I didn't even realize when I'd started crying. I tried calling him back to try and explain myself, to try and dig myself out of the hole I was in, but there was no use. He never looked back. It turned out that Harry had taken me out and had bought me all those things using the firm's money. Every single thing had been stolen from the firm's accounts. Peter had found out about Harry's embezzling and had been tracing Harry's purchases so he could build a case against him and take all the evidence to the company. He'd been following Harry for weeks before that night and had just assumed that he was spending all the firm's money on a random girl. But that night he'd followed Harry and I into that bar and had caught a glimpse of me. Maybe if I wasn't so distracted by Harry flaunting his money, I would have noticed Peter, but all I could see at the time were the bills Harry kept throwing onto the table as he ordered more drinks. By the time I got back to the apartment that night, Peter and our daughter were gone. Most of their things were still there, but it was obvious that he'd grabbed the important stuff and left quickly. I had no idea what to do. I wasn't stupid. I knew that I couldn't keep doing what I was doing forever, but I thought that I would be the one to end things with Harry once I'd gotten all I wanted from him, and then I could go back to my old life. I never imagined that something like that would happen. I never planned for Peter to find out, much less in the way that he did. I tried to reach out, but there was no use. He didn't answer my calls or my messages. Nothing. I was too ashamed to show my face at the firm, so there was no way that I could track him down. I had no idea where he or our daughter was in the week that he was gone or what he was up to. You probably already think I'm awful, so I won't hide that I didn't stop sleeping with Harry. I told myself that I was only doing it because Harry could tell me where Peter was, and if he'd been showing up for work, he hadn't. But the truth was that I wasn't ready to give up the lifestyle he offered. I was already on the verge of losing one life. Why lose them both? But, and most of you would be excited for this next part, things would eventually catch up to me during a date I was having with Harry, when 2 officers stopped in front of our table and arrested him. I watched them put him in handcuffs, read him his rights, and cart him away. I would learn later that day that Peter had submitted all the evidence he had collected to the firm's executives the very next day after catching me in bed with Harry, and that he hadn't been coming to work because he'd been working behind the scenes with the firm to get Harry arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and a range of other things. But it didn't end there. 3 days later, I would learn through an email that I was no longer employed at the school. The email claimed that it was because of the scandal that my relationship would bring to the school now that Harry's crimes and my relationship with him was somewhat public, but I knew that a part of my termination had to do with Peter's brother's personal feelings. But as unfair as it was, there was nothing I could do. About a week after Harry's arrest, officers showed up at the apartment and seized all the things that he had gifted me, since they had been bought with the company's money. I managed to keep only a few things which I had to sell to keep paying the rent on the apartment, but with losing my job and no more help from Peter, I had to move out eventually. I lost everything, and I still wasn't able to contact Peter. I knew from local papers that did stories on the scandal that Peter finally got the promotion we'd been hoping for so long. Of course, it had to happen when things were strained between us. The worst part about this whole thing is that I had to move back home. I packed up most of everything left in the apartment and drove back to that house. I didn't have a choice. It probably wasn't likely that I would get another job there, since almost everyone knew me as the mistress of a criminal. It's been a week since I moved back, and several more since everything happened. Peter finally called back to let me know that he would be going forward with a divorce, and that we needed to meet to talk about splitting time with our daughter. I am horrified at what has happened, and that it has come to this. Not only have I lost everything that I cared about, but I'm back in the prison I fought so hard to escape. I was greedy and unsatisfied. I wanted more than Peter could give, and now I've lost it all. Well, that's my story, and that's how I ruined my life. A lot of you probably think karma got to me and that I deserved all that I got, but remember that I'm just a person who wanted a better life. Is that so wrong? Am I really so evil because of that? As